Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I always believed that love in its purest form was meant to be simple, a mother's love, uncomplicated, unwavering, absolute. But as I stood in the dimly lit bathroom that night, watching my son Grayson struggle to keep his eyes open, I felt something I hadn't expected, not fear, not guilt, but something deeper, something heavier, the weight of being the only person in his life who could ever truly catch him. When he fell, Grayson was slumped against the sink, his fingers gripping the edge as though the world beneath him had tilted just slightly off balance. The scent of whiskey and citrus clung to him, mixed with the faintest trace of his cologne, one I had bought for him last Christmas. He had always been responsible, never reckless. Never the kind of boy who came home drunk, stumbling through the front door like some of his friends did tonight. Was different. "I can do it," he mumbled, his voice thick and sluggish as he tried to turn the faucet on. His fingers fumbled over the handles, and I could see the crease of frustration form between his brows. He had always been so independent even as a child, insisting on tying his own shoes, pouring his own milk, refusing my help even when he needed it. I stepped forward and reached for the faucet myself, twisting the cold handle. The water splashed against the porcelain, swirling down the drain. Grayson just let me help. He exhaled heavily, his resistance softening. I could see it in the way. His shoulders slumped the way his grip on the sink loosened. He hated this, being vulnerable, being seen like this, but he trusted me. He had always trusted me. I took a clean washcloth from the shelf and ran it under the water, wringing it out before gently pressing it against his forehead. His skin was warm, flushed from the alcohol, and as I moved to wipe the sweat from his brow, his eyes fluttered shut. "You shouldn't have weighed up," he murmured, his voice quieter, now almost boyish in its exhaustion. "I always weighed up." He smiled just barely, and for a moment he was my little boy again, the one who used to climb into my bed after a bad dream, the one who held my hand too tightly on his first day of school, the one who used to tell me everything before the world taught him that some things were better kept to himself. I ran the damp cloth over his cheeks, his jawline, the stubble he was still getting used to shaving. Before this story spirals even further, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more. And when the story ends, don't forget to show your support through likes and comments. His hair was damp with sweat, strands of it curling at his temples. "I didn't mean to drink that much," he admitted, his voice thick with something that wasn't quite regret, but something close. "I know. I don't know. I guess I wanted to forget everything for a little while." I hesitated, my hands stilling for just a moment. Forget what? He let out a slow breath. "I still closed everything." Grayson wasn't the kind of boy who ran from his problems. He was the one who faced them head-on, the one who held everything together, the one who took care of everyone else before himself. But tonight he had let go. Tonight he had allowed himself to fall. I brushed the damp cloth down his neck over the pulse, beating steadily beneath his skin. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," I said gently. His lips parted as if he was going to say something, but he only shook his head. I didn't press him. Instead, I turned off the faucet and set the cloth aside, reaching for the towel hanging by the door. "Come on," I said softly, "let's get you to bed." He didn't argue. That's how I knew he was more exhausted than he let on. Grayson never let anyone take care of him, but tonight, just this. Once he did. I slid an arm around his back, guiding him toward his room. He leaned into me, his weight heavy against my side, and for the first time in years I felt just how much he had grown. He wasn't a child anymore. He was taller than me now, broader, stronger. But in this moment he was still mine. We reached his bed and he all but collapsed onto the mattress with a heavy sigh. I pulled the blanket over him, smoothing it out the way I used to when he was small. "You'll feel better in the morning," I murmured, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He nodded, his eyes already closing. And then, just as I was about to turn off the light, his fingers curled around my wrist. "Stay." He whispered, my heart clenched for a moment. I hesitated not because I didn't want to, but because something about the way he said it so soft, so uncertain made me realize just how much he had been holding inside. I sat down beside him, my hand resting lightly over his. "I'm here," I said, "and I would be always, even when he didn't ask, even when he pretended he didn't need me, even when the world told him he should stand on his own, because that's what love was, not just the easy parts, not just the moments of laughter and pride. Love was this quiet moments, the heavy ones, the night spent sitting in the dark waiting for the storm to pass." Grayson's breathing slowed, his grip on my wrist loosening as sleep pulled him under. I stayed a little while longer watching over him, just like I always had, just like I always would. I hadn't meant to fall asleep beside Grayson. The exhaustion had crept up on me the way it always did, silent, insistent, slipping beneath my skin until my body could no longer ignore it. I had been sitting on the edge of his bed watching over him like I had when he was small, waiting to make sure he didn't wake in the night, feeling ill from too many cocktails. But the warmth of the room, the steady sound of his breathing, and the weight of everything I had been carrying pressed down on me until my body simply gave in when I woke. The first thing I felt was warmth, not the usual morning chill of the house, nor the distant coldness of the other side of my own bed, where Mateo slept too far away for me to ever reach. This was different, closer. The second thing I felt was weight. Grayson's arm was slung over me, his body pressed against mine as if he had unconsciously sought me out in sleep. His grip was firm but unhurried, like he had done this 999 times before, like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment I didn't move, my mind, still hazy with sleep, struggled to place this feeling, this closeness, this comfort. It had been so long since I had woken up with someone holding me like this, years. Maybe Mateo had long since stopped reaching for me in the night, stopped draping an arm over my waist the way he used to when we were first married. I had learned to live with it, with a quiet space between us that had stretched wider and wider until it felt like an ocean. But here in this moment I wasn't alone. Grayson stirred his breath, warm against my shoulder, and then softly, "Hi, Mom." His voice was thick with sleep, but there was something else in it too, something gentle. "Hunt, I had a good night with you." My heart clenched. It was such a simple thing to say, yet it held weight. I exhaled slowly, unsure of how to respond. His body was still heavy against mine, his arms still draped over me, holding me in place. He wasn't in a hurry to move, and for a moment neither was I. But then reality returned. Seeping in through the early morning light filtering through the curtains, I carefully shifted, easing out from under his arm, and sat up on the edge of the bed. "I'm glad," I said. Finally, my voice soft. Grayson stretched, his movements unhurried, a lazy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't seem embarrassed or in a rush to explain himself. He just looked happy, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. And yet, as I left his room and closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had shifted. Later that morning, after breakfast, Grayson and I went to the grocery store. It was something we had done together for years, a habit that formed when he was a boy, our little routine. When he was younger, he used to sit in the shopping cart, chattering away about superheroes and soccer practice while I filled our basket with produce and cereal boxes. Even as he grew older, he still liked tagging along, picking out his favorite snacks, sneaking extra things into the cart when he thought I wasn't looking, but today felt different as we walked through the aisles. Grayson was unusually attentive. He kept glancing at me, his gaze lingering longer than usual, as if he was studying me. First I ignored it, but then he started saying things. "You look nice today, Mom." I blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't unusual for Grayson to be sweet. He had always been thoughtful, the kind of boy who noticed when I was tired, the kind who remembered my birthday without needing a reminder. But this was different. I laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Oh, please. I just threw this on." He tilted his head, considering. "No. I mean it. You always look nice." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, not in a bad way, just unexpected. I busied myself with picking out a carton of eggs, willing my pulse to slow. A moment later, Grayson spoke again. "Hey, Mom, do you ever feel like I don't know, like you don't get enough attention?" I turned to him, startled what he shrugged, his expression unreadable. I just mean you do everything for everyone. You take care of me. You take care of Mateo, but who takes care of you? His words hit me harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, suddenly unsure of what to say because the truth was he was right. I didn't get attention, not anymore. Mateo had long since stopped noticing me in the ways that mattered. He was polite, sure, civil. But there were no compliments, no small touches, no moments of laughter shared between us anymore. We existed in the same house, but we were miles apart. I swallowed. That's just part of being a mom. Grayson frowned. That doesn't seem fair. I let out a soft laugh, trying to brush it off. Life isn't fair, sweetheart, but he wasn't letting it go. As we continued shopping, Grayson kept finding small ways to make me feel seen. He reached for things on high shelves. Before I could ask, he carried the bags without hesitation. He complimented my choices, told me I had great taste, and I let him because even though a part of me felt strange accepting it, another part of me, one I had ignored for far too long, was desperate for it. By the time we got home, I felt lighter, maybe even happier. As I unpacked the groceries, Grayson leaned against the counter, watching me. I just want you to know, he said, his voice quiet but sure. I think you deserve to feel appreciated. I met his gaze, something thick and unspoken, settling between us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone truly saw me. The day passed in a way that felt effortless, like slipping into a memory of a time when things were simpler. When love was easy and laughter came freely. Grayson and I spent most of the afternoon in the kitchen, moving around each other in perfect rhythm. We chopped vegetables for the stew, argued over how much seasoning to add, and taste tested more than we probably should have. At one point, he flicked a bit of flour at me and I gasped in mock horror before retaliating with a handful of diced onions. The whole kitchen smelled of garlic, rosemary, and slow-oozed comfort, but more than anything, it smelled like home. I hadn't felt this light in a long time. In the evening, Grayson fired up the grill outside. The summer air was warm but carried the promise of a cooler night ahead. The backyard was quiet, except for the occasional crackling of the barbecue flames and the sound of cicadas in the distance. Grayson sat on the wooden steps leading to the yard, rolling a beer bottle between his palms. You know, we should do this more often, he said. I looked up from setting the table. Do what? Spend time together, just us. There was something so simple and honest about the way he said it that I couldn't help but smile. I'd like that. I admitted Mateo didn't join us. He had come home late, mumbled something about being exhausted, and retreated to his study without even acknowledging the meal we had prepared. I wasn't surprised, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't let his indifference ruin my evening, Grayson noticed. Of course, he always noticed. After dinner, we lingered outside for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about the parties he had been going to, the friends he wasn't sure were really friends, the things he wanted to do with his life but hadn't quite figured out yet. He listened, really listened, and in return he listened to me too. When the night grew darker and the air carried a cooler bite, we went inside. It was late, but neither of us was ready for the day to end. Come hang out in my room, Grayson suggested, as he stifled a yawn like we used to. There was something almost nostalgic about the way he said it, a quiet longing in his voice that I understood all too well. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Grayson's room hadn't changed much since he was a teenager. It still smelled faintly of old cologne and the pages of books he had never quite finished reading. There were posters on the walls from his high school years, a mix of bands and movie quotes that had once defined him but now seemed like remnants of a past life. He flopped onto the bed with a sigh, arms folded behind his head. You know, sometimes I forget how nice it is to just be here. I sat on the edge of the mattress, smoothing a wrinkle in the blanket. Yeah, he said, it's weird when you're a kid. You can't wait to grow up, to move out, to be independent. And then one day you realize that some of your best moments happened right here in the quiet when you weren't rushing towards something else. His words sat between us, heavy but comforting. I know what you mean, I said softly. I feel that way too. Sometimes Grayson turned his head to look at me. His expression unreadable. Do you miss it? Miss what when things were different, when you were happy? I swallowed. I am happy. Grayson gave me a knowing look. Are you? I let out a quiet breath, looking down at my hands. I don't know. I admitted sometimes I think I just got used to feeling invisible. Grayson sat up at that, leaning forward. You're not invisible, Mom. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. It's different. When you get older, people stop looking at you the same way. They stop noticing the little things. It's not that Mateo is a bad person. He's just not present, not for me. Grayson frowned. That's not fair. You deserve better than that. I shook my head. It's not about fairness, sweetheart. Sometimes people just grow apart. The silence stretched between us for a moment before Grayson spoke again. You used to give me massages when I was a kid, he said. Suddenly, remember. I let out a soft chuckle. Of course I do. You'd always complain that I didn't press hard enough. He grinned. I was a dramatic child. That's one way to put it. A beat of silence passed. Then do you want me to give you a massage? Asked, tilting my head. Grayson blinked, then laughed. I was actually going to ask you the same thing. I rolled my eyes, playfully typical. I reached out, resting my hands on his shoulders, and slowly began to knead the tension from his muscles. He let out a deep breath, his head dropping forward. God, that feels good, smiled. You're as tense as your father used to be. Grayson scoffed, except he has no excuse. I'm young and stressed. He's just. He cut himself off, shaking his head. Never mind. I didn't push. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, letting my fingers work their way over the knots in his shoulders, down his back. It was comforting in a way, this small act of care. It reminded me of when he was younger, when he would crawl onto the couch and lay his head in my lap, asking for his hair to be played with. Through a long day, there was something sacred about touch, about being present for someone in a way that words couldn't always express. I could feel Grayson relax beneath my hands, the tension melting away. Thanks, Mom, he murmured. Always. I whispered. We stayed like that for a long time in the quiet, and for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't feel invisible, felt seen, felt loved, felt like I mattered. I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, still draped in the deep blue of early morning. For a moment I stayed in bed, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Mateo's side of the bed was cold, untouched. I couldn't remember the last time we had gone to sleep at the same time, let alone reached for each other in the dark. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling. Grayson had said something to me last night that I couldn't shake. You deserve better than that. The words had lingered in my mind long after I had left his room, long after I had stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my reflection, as if I were seeing myself for the first time in years. Did I deserve better? Or had I simply grown used to the emptiness, the quiet indifference of a husband who no longer saw me the way my wants, my needs had been reduced to afterthoughts, the loneliness that I had convinced myself was just a natural part of getting older? I sat up, exhaling slowly. There was a time when I had felt wanted, a time when love wasn't just routine but something warm and alive. And lately, I had felt glimpses of that again, not from Mateo but from the one person who had never failed to notice me. Grayson. Later that morning, Grayson found me in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in my hands. You okay? He asked, leaning against the counter. I smiled, though it felt small. Yeah, just thinking about what. I hesitated, then shook my head. Nothing important. Grayson studied me for a moment, then nudged my arm. Come on, let's do something today, just us. I raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? Something fun, he said, flashing that boyish grin of his, something that'll make you stop overthinking for a few hours. I let out a soft laugh. That's a tall order. We'll see about that, and just like that, my morning transformed. We drove out to the farmer's market on the edge of town, where the air smelled of fresh bread and ripe peaches. Grayson walked beside me, hands in his pockets, occasionally reaching out to pick up an apple or a bundle of herbs, holding them up as if he were critiquing a masterpiece. What about this one? He asked, lifting an oversized zucchini. Too aggressive. I snorted, highly aggressive. That's a statement vegetable. He grinned. I like my vegetables to have a present. We filled a basket with everything we needed for dinner, a mix of fresh vegetables, cuts of meat from the butcher's stall, and a loaf of sourdough so perfect it felt like a crime to slice it. As we loaded everything into the car, Grayson glanced over at me. You look happy. I blinked, caught off guard. He said simply, you look happy today. I opened my mouth to respond but found that I didn't know what to say, 'cause he was right. I did feel happy, and it had been a long time since I had felt that way back home. We cooked together again. Kitchen was filled with laughter, the clatter of pans, the sizzle of butter hitting the skillet. Grayson moved easily around me, reaching for things before I could ask, bumping my shoulder playfully as he stirred the stew. Mateo was home but barely present. He passed through the kitchen once, muttered something about paperwork, and disappeared into his office without so much as a glance. The meal we were making. Grayson saw it. He didn't say anything, but I noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands gripped the little harder than necessary. He doesn't even ask. Grayson muttered under his breath as he wiped his hands on a kitchen towel. I looked at him, asked how your day was. He said simply, how you're feeling. I turned back to the pot on the stove, stirring, absent. It's just how things are. That doesn't mean it's okay. I swallowed, my grip on the spoon tightening. I know the air between us shifted, something unspoken, hung there, thick and heavy, but neither of us acknowledged it. Instead, Grayson took the plates from the cabinet, setting the table with a quiet determination. We ate outside that night, just the three of us. The sky was a deep shade of violet, the air warm but comfortable. Grayson poured me a glass of wine, even though I hadn't asked for one. We ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, the way we always did when it was just us. By the time we had finished, I felt lighter, like I had been carrying something heavy for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to put it down. After dinner, we ended up in Grayson's room again. It was becoming a habit. These late-night conversations, the quiet moments where we let our guards down in ways we didn't during the day. He sat on the edge of the bed, arms resting on his knees, watching me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what makes you happy? He asked. I tilted my head. What do you mean? I mean, outside of being a mom, outside of being Mateo's wife? Just you? He hesitated. It was such a simple question, but it felt impossible to answer, because when was the last time I had thought about that? I don't know, I admitted. Finally, Grayson didn't look surprised. You? Should I let out a quiet breath, looking down at my hands? Maybe I don't even know who I am outside of those things anymore. Grayson reached out, resting. A hand over mine was warm, steady. Then maybe it's time to find out. I looked up at him. Something in my C****** T tightening, because he wasn't just saying it, he meant it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone wasn't just seeing me as a mother, as a wife, as someone who existed in the background of their life. Grayson saw me, the real me, and maybe that was the first step to finding myself again. Then we were fine. We didn't pay attention to anything. We dissolved into the world like three people who simply understand each other without words, like those who need nothing more than to be with each. Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.